Hi everybody and welcome to another episode of Gaffer and Gear. Today we're finally going to get around to having a look at the Aputure Nova P300c. This light is quite a huge technical achievement. I'm really blown away by the colour results. Now we're also in the video going to be comparing it to the grandfather of RGBWW, which is the Skypanel down the back there, so comparing it to a Skypanel S-30. Now the reason we're going to be doing that is to give you plenty of information if you're a working gaffer to help you decide whether now is the time to consider selling off your Skypanels and investing in light engine technology that has better colour render and is brighter, or to hold on to your Skypanels. So depending on how you use your Skypanels and your working situation, the answer is going to be different. So I'm going to give you all the information you need to know to make that decision, because for some of you, selling off a Skypanel second hand will pay for these things and still leave some money in your pocket. Okay, I'd just like to start off with a statement that Aputure did send me this light for review, and it's a very generous light to give someone for a review, I've got to say, at 3,000 Australian dollars. But I'd just like to let you know that that hasn't influenced my review with this opening dialogue. And first thing I want to start off with is a disclaimer for all the other people who have reviewed this and given it an absolute stellar review. For 95% of you, the light sitting there in the box, straight out of the box as it is, will be the best light you've ever used. Hands down the best light. There's no doubting it. It's got amazing colour render. It is amazingly powerful for its form factor. And, you know, watt per lumen, extremely powerful. The capabilities, just amazing. Absolutely amazing. And myself personally, if I was using this in my small van, which does, corporates, low-end TV commercials, I wouldn't have a problem with this light at all. I would absolutely love it. 2 years ago, I would have given this light a review of a 10 out of 10. However, I don't just do work like that. My other van, which has got a lot of expensive toys in it, is very, very heavily dependent on DMX and battery operation. Now, when it comes to DMX and battery operation, I have to say that I didn't feel like I was reviewing this light. I felt like I was the first person to ever beta test it. This light is nowhere near ready to go onto a complex DMX environment set. Nowhere near ready. Now, I have a good relationship with Aputure, and I can ask them honest questions and they give me honest feedback. So in the next firmware patch that comes through, pretty much every single issue I have with this light will be addressed. All right, so let's start off the review. Now, the best place to start any review is how much does it cost and what do you get for your money. So this Nova sells for about $1,700 US, which is about 3,000 Australian dollars. However, I would strongly recommend spending an additional $200 US or an additional 350 Australian dollars and getting the hard case. Now, the hard case I've got positioned the wrong way around. There we go, that's better. It has an extendable handle and wheels. Now, just to show you how heavy this case is or how light it is, depending on your perspective, if you can pick up a shot bag, you can easily pick up this case. Now, one thing I love about this case is it's got spring-loaded, easy-to-release locks. So it doesn't matter how weak you are, you don't need strong finger strength, easy to open. Now, when you first open the case, the light will be positioned this way up. So you can clearly see a warning sticker telling you to take the protection off the perspex. But you can orientate it the other way around. So you can get it in and out via the carry handles. All right, now in case you don't know anything about the Nova, I'll do a quick run through at this point. This little thing is a 300 watt LED light engine, RGBWW. That's right, this little thing is 300 watts with built-in power supply. Amazingly compact. Now this thing has full RGB capabilities such as HSI modes, gel libraries, source matching, all those modes that the top end lights have. All right, let's continue through the kit. All right, so you get one of these clamps. And look at the way the jaw extends. So what I love about these clamps is they don't open up like that, they extend that way. So you can actually get this onto a big light stand, okay? It'll mount the base of a 3-section wind-up stand, no problem. Okay, so you get the clamp. Next thing in the kit we'll talk about is the controller. Okay, so this is the control console to run the light. Now you can put this on the light, or, and you've probably guessed this already, you can put it at the base of the stand, whichever is more convenient for you. Now, of course, you get 2 leads. You get a small lead for the controller, for when you're running it up here, and you get a 3-meter lead to run it down at the bottom. You also get a Nutrix power connector. And the one thing I want to point out for gaffers is this Nutrix power connector is made of heat-resistant cabling, so it does meet our safety standards for using it in a lighting grid. Okay, now usually in my reviews at this point I start doing a bit of a run through and go through how to operate the light. But what I think I'd do is start off with the positives and negatives first, because I'm one of the last people to get around to reviewing this. So you've probably watched 15 other videos about how to operate it, but I will do a run through later. So let's start off with the pros and negatives, starting off with the pros. And the first big pro has got to be price point. Now, I don't want to come across as arrogant here. For a lot of you who are looking at getting into lighting, this represents a substantial investment. It is a lot of money. So that's why you're probably watching my episode here, to see if you can justify spending that sort of coin. But to give you some idea of why somebody like me says this is cheap, I own 2 of those sky panels back there. Now, for the price of 2 of those sky panels, you can buy 5 of these. Okay. Now, to put that into some sort of perspective, they have very, very similar capabilities. The light back there is 200 watts. This one is 300 watts. So this unit is brighter and has better color render because it's got a new light engine. So relatively speaking, this is very, very cheap, but it is still a lot of money for a lot of you. All right, so let's start off going through the positive things by going through the technical data. Normally I'd do this at the end of the video because it can be a bit boring, but the technical data really is why this light is superb. All right, so let's start off with brightness. Now, I measure my brightness at 3 meters and not 1 meter. The problem with taking readings at 1 meter is you can get the optics of the light concentrate at that point and give you unrealistic information as to how realistically bright these are. And to give you some sort of comparison, because lux numbers at the end of the day don't mean a lot for people, I'm also comparing it to the Skypanel S-30, because pretty much everybody who's a professional worker has used those, and it gives you a gauge point. Okay, so at 3 meters, set to 3,200, this unit came in at 1,020 lux, which makes it 54% brighter than the Skypanel S-30-C. Now, the next thing I want to point out is these are my readings. I took them in the workshop here. These are not off a catalogue. Now, at 5,600 Kelvin, this unit came in at 1,160 lux, and the Skypanel came in at 709, which makes this 64% brighter than the Skypanel S-30 in daylight. So what that means is this won't touch the Skypanel S-60. It's not as bright as the Skypanel S-60, but it is way brighter than the Skypanel S-30. Now, just to give you some other stats, if you take the diffuser out of the Skypanel, which you can do, this has a fixed diffuser, you can't do that. The Nova is still 54% brighter. And if you run the Skypanel with the intensifier in it, this unit is still 10% brighter. Now, the one thing that's very unusual about this light is the extended CCT range. Aputure claim a range from 2,000 Kelvin up to 10,000 Kelvin. However, when I metered it, this light only came in at about 9,300 Kelvin at the top. Now, what's unusual about this Kelvin range is that this unit gets down to 2,000 Kelvin without an amber emitter. But unfortunately, it shows. At 2,000 Kelvin, you can see that the wavelength is very anorexic, and the TM30 color vector testing indicates a color render score of 62. So right down at the bottom Kelvin values, this is pretty much an effects light that's just going to give you a wash. I wouldn't really use it for anything else. However, above 2,400 Kelvin, the color scores on this light are remarkable. Now at 2,400 Kelvin, the wavelength fills out, and the light scores a TN30 color vector test score of 92. Now here's where this light is remarkable. from 2500 Kelvin all the way up to 7300 Kelvin, this thing scores 95 plus on its TN30 color vector testing. Now I just want to point out, I've done this testing. I tested at every single Kelvin point that you can dial in. Now what's even more remarkable is if we take that range and break it down, between 2500 Kelvin and 3400 Kelvin, this thing actually scores 96. And between 4400 Kelvin to 6100 Kelvin, it was also scoring 96. Now up until this point, I've only had a handful of lights that can read a 96, and that's only in one point. This is doing it over a massive range, which makes this the highest color rendering light I've ever tested. Now what's really surprising with it is even right at the top at 10,000 Kelvin, this thing still scored a very impressive 92% color render, and the color vector is still in shape. Now the next thing that's a positive for the Nova, particularly for its price point, is it is a legit RGBWW light engine. Now what I mean by that is a lot of panel lights at this price point pretending to be RGBWW are really just bicolor lights with some RGB functionality slapped in. This unit, on the other hand, actually uses all of its color emitters in the white light mode to vector into an accurate white point. The next advantage with this light is it has very accurate kelvins. However, the higher the Kelvin value you dial in, the more it drifts away from the target value. In its daylights, it is typically accurate to minus 120 degrees Kelvin on average, which isn't so bad. But in its warm whites, it is typically accurate to plus or minus 17 Kelvin. Okay, so now let's talk about the negatives. And the first negative really only affects pro end users, people who are gaffers or rigging out studios, and that is the DMX. The DMX has nowhere near the level of sophistication of top-end lights like a Skypanel. So if you're looking to use this as a Skypanel replacement in studio, a bit later on in the video, we'll go through the DMX and talk about the differences. So that leads us to the next fault. And the next fault really shows that you can take a lot of care and effort and get a lot of stuff right and overlook the obvious. So what is the problem? The battery inlet. Now, I pointed this out to Aputure a couple of days ago. They had a meeting about it and they got back to me and said they'll be replacing this with the correct battery inlet on the next batch of lights being made. So what's wrong with this? Well, it's a 4-pin XLR and the standard for 24 to 48 volt is 3-pin XLR. Now, even if you do manage to find a battery plate that has 4-pin XLR that can run 2 V-locks, you're going to encounter the next problem. They've also got the wrong end of the power cable. So some of you might be thinking, well, okay, I'm making a big deal about nothing here. All we need to do is make a 4-pin to 4-pin connector. Pins at one end, pins at the other, plug it into the battery, plug it into the light, problem solved. Okay, so here's where this is a bad idea, and I'm going to point out that the battery is turned off. Okay. Now, if the battery was turned on, these pins here, which are exposed metal, can be shorted out. Anything metallic that goes in there could short the battery system out, and that could cost you a lot of money. Now, to give you an idea of how easy it would be to short out the battery system, let's say we're finished up filming for the day, and we go to disconnect the light. So the battery's plugged in and turned on and connected to the light. We disconnect it, let the cable drop to the floor, and on the way down, it hits something metal like a lock-off. You've now shorted out your battery system. All right, so we're getting very sidetracked from doing a review, but this is my solution. What I'm going to do is get a cable tie, feed that through the heat sink at the back here underneath the clamp mount, feed it back down the other way. Then I'll get my adapter cable, plug that in, and then using that cable tie, I'll permanently secure that cable to the light. Okay, try and get this as tight as I can get it. Okay, so the idea is this stays in the light, so it can't get disconnected. This end doesn't matter. That's not going to short anything out. That's the end that could short stuff out. And the reason I'm going to cable tie it is so that this doesn't end up somewhere else in my kit where it could do damage. And the other thing too is if someone does disconnect it, this can't fall far enough to hit anything that's metallic. So problem solved. Okay, so let's do a quick walkthrough of the unit. So the first thing I'll point out is it's you can use dual stands on it. So you can use a small stand like this or a decent stand. Now, I would be very reluctant to run a light this heavy and this expensive off a pathetic stand like this because it's very top heavy. Now, the most common reason I hear from people who do this is they don't want to carry a heavy stand around. And then what is the next thing I see them do? Go to their car and bring 2 shop bags to counterweight it. Okay, it completely defeated the purpose. So you're better off having, buying a light like this, buying a decent stand that's heavy to counterweight it down the bottom. Then you only got to carry 1 shop bag. Okay, you don't need to carry 2 shotties. Now, what I like about this, a little bit of thought's gone into it. How often do you lose these as a gaffer? Dumb question. I've lost every single one. Anyway, these thread into the side here, so you're not going to lose them. Okay. So that's pretty cool. Anyway, I'm going to feel a lot safer now that this is on a decent stand. Okay, I feel a lot better. Okay, so let's go over the build quality very quickly. It is very solid, and it's just beautifully built. It really is a piece of art, and it's built to last. That is definite. One thing I do like about it is the lock-off. Okay, it actually has a decent lock-off, and that'll be able to take large accessories. You could easily put a 5-foot octo on this, no problem at all. Now, speaking of which, the next episode will be on DOP choice products that fit this. So we've got a 5-foot octo, 3-foot octo, we've got a 5-foot lantern, snap bags, snap grids. So Stefan at DOP choice was very, very nice to send me all that stuff to go with this. And a big thank you to Aputure for organising that episode for me as well. So I'll be using all that stuff on this, okay, so they get an extra bit of branding, but I really do appreciate that. One thing I like with this thing is the Nutrix connector. This is becoming a film industry standard, and I've got to say I love it. So that's the power in, so you put it in and twist. That is not going to accidentally disconnect, so I'm glad that's becoming a standard. Got your battery inlet here, which we've already talked about, and you've got your controller inlet here. Let's get onto the controller. Now the controller can mount, on the stand with the clamp, and it can mount on the back here. You can also put it over here, off to the side, if you wanted to. If it's up against a wall. Now I'm not a huge fan of this cable management. I might end up taking that off because I reckon that'll be ripping my jackets. So we'll have a look, but we'll see how we go with that. Now the controller, I just want to point a few things out for the gaffers. Okay, so it runs off 5 pins, so they give you two leads. You've got a short lead and you've got the long lead, of course. Now you can use 2 of the long leads. Okay, so they're the same lead as the head cable for a 300D Mark II or the 300X. So you can link 2 leads together. So I've checked that with them, no more than 2 leads. So you might be wondering where you might want to do that. Well, if you had this out on a Menace arm, for example, you could run the controller cable back down to the unit, and you could adjust your DMX settings or all your settings really from down at the base. So that is something that could be handy. Now, one thing to point out with that though is power does go into this unit. Okay, so the power goes into here, and this then phantom powers this. So the reason I'm pointing that out is this is a 5-pin connector, but somewhere in the Aputure information, somewhere I found online the core thickness parameters of their cables. Don't use a DMX cable. Okay, so if you're thinking one day, I need to get the light higher up, I'll just use a DMX cable. No, it won't. This thing's phantom powered. You're going to need a thicker core cable than in your DMX. All right, so let's pop this on. And this is a fantastically engineered clamp. That was no effort at all to get that on. Okay, let's plug it in and have a look. So we plug our controller into the controller port. Now, one problem with this unit, if you're used to, say, running Skypanels, is when you turn this on, you don't have time to go get a cigarette. It quite literally is that quick. All right, let's start running through the menu system. Now, I've got to say, if you're a gaffer or a professional user, you'll be pretty confident within about 30 seconds of sighting the screen that you'd be able to get your basic operation running. And I have to say, within about probably 5 minutes of playing with the whole thing, you'll be confident that you could take it on set and do everything with it. It is really straightforward to operate. The logic behind the control layout is so simple that you can have happy accidents. Like you can be running an effect and go, how do I pause this? And you just hit a button and it pauses. So it's very, very well considered in the layout. When you turn it on, it goes into your CCT mode. We'll talk about this in a sec. We'll go through the light modes, other light modes first that you've got. So down here you've got light mode button, press that. And then you use this button to scroll. Okay, so you've got CCT, HSI, hue, saturation, intensity, effects, RGB, XY, source, which is real world lights, like mercury vapors, things like that. So you can get those programmed in. Gel, there's heaps of gels in this thing. I don't know the number, but there's a lot. Okay, so let's go back to our CCT. Now to select, you just press the button. How easy is that? Okay, and you've got 3 parameters and 3 knobs. Pretty straightforward. Okay, so intensity, you can dim in 0.1% increments. Okay, you can also select your dimmer curves. We'll get into that later. CCT, huge Kelvin range on it with, I think, I'm not sure if I've mentioned it, 2,000 to 10,000 Kelvin, and it just in 100 Kelvin increments. Okay, and you've got plus minus green. Now I've got a bit of a criticism of the plus minus green. It only works in 10% increments. Okay, so I would like to see 1% increment adjustments somewhere along the way. So I've tried pressing the button to see if it changes the increment scale. It doesn't. So hopefully that's something they could improve on. Okay, let's have a look at the next mode. So let's go down to HSI. Now something I just want to point out with the HSI mode is the colors are very saturated. So it's not like, say, a Skypanel or other lights where the saturation seems to peak at the D55 or the D56 HSI standard. This unit's colors are much more richer, much more vibrant. So vibrant, in fact, that if you desaturate them to 50% and take a meter reading, they'll still read at 100% saturation on the meter. So that's not a criticism. It's not a negative. It's an observation. So what I would say in relation to that is, if you are, say, doing a music clip and you're after really, really vibrant, like K-pop colors, I would rent an Aputure over, say, a Skypanel. But if you want subtlety in your colors, if you just want them in the background but not looking like bubblegum or K-pop, you want to really do your adjustment levels down low in the saturations, I would get something like a Skypanel or something like a Kino Flow instead, just because you've got more adjustment down low. But if you love deep saturated colors, music clip colors, this is definitely your new best friend. Okay, so we go across to desaturation now. So I keep pressing the buttons because I have to do that on the Skypanel. I don't have to do that on this. So it desaturates in 1% increments. Now, at this point in time, you can't select a Kelvin to desaturate to. Maybe that'll be something that happens in the future. It desaturates to 6,300 Kelvin. And I think it's got something like a DUV of 0.0040 or something. So it's not the best white light to desaturate to, but hey, most lights aren't, to be quite honest with you, where you can't select your Kelvin. All right, let's go into the next light mode, effects. Okay, I keep turning the wrong button. Okay, there we go, effects. Okay, you've got plenty of effects to choose from. You just use the scroller up here. I'm not going to go through all of them. Club lights, paparazzi, and you've got loads of things you can change once you select. So let's select fire, for example. So you can select warmer, neutral, cooler. You can select the speed of the fire. Now, for me, with the fire effect, it's not bad. It's pretty good, but it doesn't touch a Skypanel's fire effect, which is the only reason I'm mentioning that is that's the only reason I'm going to be keeping my S30s is that and DMX control. Is if this thing had better fire effect, it would probably be considering me getting rid of my S30s. All right, so that's the fire effect. So to get back out of that, press light mode, I think it is. There we go. You got options like your strobe, explosion. Now explosion, let's just click into that, for example, and show you what you've got. You can select your colors from like your HSI. Okay, so we'll click on there. You can dial in a color. All right, so let's go back to light mode. You can select a CCT. You can select a source. You can select an XY. You've got loads of parameters to select the color of your explosion. This is amazing. It really is. It really is worth the money, this unit. All right, so let's get back out of there. Faulty bulb. What's something else we can do? Pulsing. Okay, no worries at all. Now, here's the interesting thing. Let's say you want to pause the effect. There you go. Okay, really simple to operate. fantastically simple to operate. And the beautiful thing with operating the effects is you can take the controller off the back, so you can be sitting next to the location monitor having a play, you know. So that's pretty awesome. I think we've covered effects enough. Okay, so let's get out of there, get back into our light mode. RGB, pretty much your standard RGB, you know all about that. Let's go back into light mode. XY, so you can dial in an XY coordinate. Source. So source matching is real world, matching to real world light sources and globes. So we've got things like, you know, tungsten bulb, incandescent, halogen, antique bulb. Let's just scroll through, warm antique, night lights, infrared glow lights, lots of stuff. CFL, somebody asked me the other day what CFL is. CFL is these ugly things, compact fluorescent lights, and the compact fluorescent lights literally do look that ugly. So that's a pretty good match. All right, so I just want to point something out. There's loads of things here. Now, I've never used a menu system like this for to match to lights, because what I've found is when you do that, let's say a low pressure sodium light like that, when you do like match to it, the cinematographer goes, ugh, oh, I don't like that. And I go, well, that's why we don't light with you know, low pressure sodium lights. You know, we tend to end up going with something close to it, but that has nicer skin on the actor. But where I use stuff like this is quite often, say we're doing a scene in a park or something like that at night, and they go, oh, we'll put the light up as a moonlight, but you can't get it high enough. It only, you know, can only go up 12 foot on a stand or something like that, and it doesn't look like a moonlight. And I go to the DOP, yeah, but we can make it look like a low pressure sodium street light, and it's bang, save the day. So that's where these are really fantastic, is light sources coming through windows. That's where I really, really love these things. All right, so let's go back to our light modes, gels. Okay, now I'm just going to point something out with the gels menu here. Okay, you've got hard switch only at this point. Now I keep saying at this point because when I bought the Skypanels, there was a lot of things they couldn't do when I first got them, and I'm aware that this thing is firmware updatable, so who knows where this thing's going to go. All right, so hard switchable. You want to select your gel, you press, so it's pretty straightforward. That button refers to this menu, that button refers to that menu. So you press it to go into a sub-menu, that's your gels, okay? So that's your gel there. Press the button, you're in your gel sub-menu. So you can select Roscoe Lee, you can select the series of gel. So this is below that button, so there you go. You can also select your list of gels, but the one thing I will point out is at this point, you can see it's not previewing the gel. It's not auditioning the gel. You can't see it happening, okay? That is getting fixed in the next firmware update, okay? So that'll be probably at about a month or so. They'll have that sorted out. So you can scroll through the gels and see them in real time, okay? There is a lot of gels in this thing. Now, the last thing to talk about is our presets, which is where you can save things. So let's say, for example, we want to save this setting in preset number 1. No worries, just hold number 1 down. It'll prompt you, do you want to replace what's in there? You've got yes or no. Press the button and you're saved. Let's say we want to save something common like 5,600 into preset number 2. Okay, so just dial that in, 5,600, there you go. Hold down number 2, replace what's in there, yes. Okay, let's say we want to save a HSI in preset number 3. Let's no worries, we'll go into our light mode, select HSI. Okay, let's select something funky, let's go that green, okay. Hold it down. Replace what's in there, yes. And now to recall them, all we do is press the button. All right, so now let's go through the menu system. Okay, so you've got your DMX settings. We're going to cover that later when we go through DMX. Fan mode, so you can select whether your fan is on force, which means all the time, or on auto. Now I just want to point something out. I've left this thing on force all the way through this video so that you can gauge if the sound's a problem, because a few people have expressed concerns about the fan noise. I'd say it's louder than a Skypanel S-30, for example, but I don't think it's loud enough to be an issue, particularly not for the brightness of the thing. And the other reason I always leave my fans on force now is so that when I turn a light on, I can hear the fans going and check that they're running, because I've had a few lights with the COBs and the LEDs damaged because the fans weren't running properly. So I'm paranoid about that now. I like to leave the fans on so I can hear a fan. Okay, so let's get back out of the menu from there. So you just press menu to go back. It's really simple. Dimmer curves. Now what I love here is if you're dyslexic like me, there's little pictures. So, oh, that's what exponential means. Oh, that's what log means. You know, so that's fantastic. Again, you want to go back in the menu, you press the menu button. So it's really straightforward. Frequency selection. So the frequency selection is if you're shooting at some weird frame rate, and to be quite honest with you, you're shooting with a cheap, crappy camera with a rolling shutter, sometimes you can get a bizarre bit of flicker. If that's happening and you don't want to change your frame rate, you can scroll through all these, and they're all slightly different. Okay, so you can find a more compatible frequency that the light runs at. Now, I've got to say, I did a quick test earlier with it. It's, I don't think you're ever going to have a problem flicker-free wise with the unit, to be quite honest with you. Bluetooth reset, that's for the mobile phone app. Now, I'm not going to talk about the mobile phone app in this video. I'm not even going to touch it, but it's called Sidus Link. So Sidus Link app. It is an amazing little phone app, but I don't have time to deal with that in this episode. Fix your serial number. Okay, firmware update. So it is firmware updatable via USB port on the side. And that's pretty much it. So that's pretty much the whole Nova there. It's really simple to operate. Now let's have a look at the DMX. So the DMX inlets are on the bottom of the controller. Now there are 5-pin XLR, which is fantastic. Now what I like about this is you can have the controller at the bottom of your light stand and be able to make simple changes to your DMX addresses, your DMX profiles, things like that. I've lost track of the amount of times I've had to get a stepladder out to do simple adjustments like that on a Skypanel because the controller's up the top. Now the next thing I like, and this might be more luck than design, is the USB port for firmware updates is on the side, and that is powered. So you can power your Lumen radio receiver off your port there, so you don't need an external battery, so that's always a plus. One less thing to worry about. Okay, so with all lights, there's quirks to getting the DMX to run. So this is the same, it's got its own little quirk in the menu. So let's go to the DMX, so press menu, then DMX settings, press the button up here. You can select your address and your profile. Now, in order to get this thing to respond to DMX commands, you need to select your profile and enter it. Okay, so I'm going to go with a CCT HSI. As soon as I hit enter on this profile, the DMX will take over control of the light, and it should go to black because that's what I've got the DMX set for. And there we go, with DMX has taken over. All right, now let's go back in the menu and have a look through the DMX profiles. So you've got CCT. Now, what I love about the CCT mode on this, and I did suggest this to them, one of the problems with a lot of manufacturers is they have a CCT mode that takes up 5 or 6 channels. And the problem for a young gaffer starting out is you probably can't afford a good DMX system. You're probably using a 12-channel slider desk because that's what you can afford. And if you've got a light that takes up 5 or 6 channels, that's your desk rect. Whereas this thing only uses 3 channels. So I think that's really important for the young gaffers coming up because this is an affordable light, high-powered light. And, you know, 4 of these you could run off a 12-channel desk. So that's pretty cool. The next profile down is your CCT and HSI. Now, earlier in the video, I was saying that the profiles are not sophisticated on this unit yet. Aputure are working on the profiles. They're working on the next profiles for version 2 of the firmware because they understand that these profiles are extremely weak. Now, the problem with this CCT HSI profile is it uses 4 channels. It's a very basic profile. And channel 4 is a hard switch between your HSI mode and your CCT mode. So the problem is you can use this mode to select a CCT or a value or a white light, and you can also use this mode to select a HSI, a color, but you can't crossfade between the two because it's a hard switch mode. Okay, let's go through the other modes. You've got CCT RGB, you've got your gels library, you've got HSI by itself, you've got source, which is your practical lights, RGB and XY, and FX. But the problem is there's no master mode. Okay, so once you're in a mode, you can't really do much else. So even, like I was saying, even in combined modes, they're a hard switch. So that really limits the capabilities of the unit. All right, so let's go in and have a look. Oh, next thing I forgot to mention, one thing I really do like about this is all of your DMX parameters that you're sending in are displayed here. So you can see your color temperature, your plus minus green. So if you're using a basic desk, you can mark it up really simple. And if you've got a controller that doesn't have a profile built into it, you can figure out what's happening really easily. That's fantastic. All right, now let's have a look at this thing and see how its dimmers respond to DMX commands. Okay, so first off, I'm going to do a fade to black, and then I'm going to take the Nova from 0 to 100%, and then from 100% back to 0, and see if there's any delay, see if there's any unnecessary fade up or fade downs that we don't want. Okay, so good news there, it instantly goes up to 100% and instantly goes down. So you can do that instant, bang. Okay, so that's pretty good. Now, something to bear in mind, if you're running this thing off batteries, that's going to be a 300 watt thump. Okay, so just bear that in mind. All right, so now what we're going to do now is a 5-second fade down and a 5-second fade up. Now, with this unit, when it gets down lower, it does flicker like a lot of LEDs do, right down the bottom. Now that might not necessarily show up in the camera, but it looks worse to eye than it does on the camera, so I'm just going to point that out. But you'll have to come around here personally and have a look, because I just can't show you on the video. Okay, so let's have a look. So 5 seconds, and here we go. And coming down. Okay, so I'm just going to do now the same thing, the fade up and fade down, with the Skypanel. Okay, so you've got a comparison of how smooth the light engine is on the Skypanel compared to the Nova. Okay, so let's have a look at that. Whoa, straight away, I saw that flicker. Straight away I knew I hit the wrong button. Okay, that's the Nova. Absolutely guarantee that's the Nova. That's the Skypanel. There we go. Okay, and coming down. Now, the profiles need a lot of work, so we're going to have a look at the CCT HSI profile, which is their strongest profile. And from that, you'll get an idea of what needs work. Now, Aputure understand this, and they're currently working on better profiles. So let's have a look. Okay, so this profile is just a 4-channel profile, so that's the problem with it. So channel 1 is your brightness, as you'd expect. Now, channel 2 is your CCT, and the unit does have the full Kelvin range over this profile. Channel 3 is your plus minus green. Now, I do have a problem with this because my issue is 0 plus minus green is in the center. And the problem with that is if you've got an old school desk, it's very easy to bump that or for that not to be perfect. So I think, yeah, center should be 0, but I also reckon 0 plus minus green should be down at the bottom. So if your slider's down at the bottom, you know you've got your plus minus green definitely turned off. But anyway, let's turn that up for the moment. And channel 4 selects whether you're in HSI or CCT mode. It's a hard switch. So if this slider gets above halfway up, it then switches to CCT mode. To HSI mode. Okay, so now that we're in HSI mode, the parameters of these two channels have changed. So this one that used to be our CCT is now our color hue. And this one that used to be our plus minus green is now our saturation. Okay, so here's the problem with this, just to show you some of the issues. So let's change this to something I've already got saved. Okay, so that there is the settings for 5,600 Kelvin with no plus minus green. And this is the settings for red, okay? Now, I've gone extremes here, so you can see all the channels are up. So here's the problem. If we try to do a fade between these two, or a transition between these two, this channel here is going to start moving up. So do a 5-second fade. It's going to start moving up over 5 seconds. Okay. This one's going to start moving up over 5 seconds. So we're going to have a CCT shift. Okay. And then the hard selector between HSI and CCT and HSI mode, when that gets to halfway, it's then going to flip over and change modes. And while these sliders here are still moving, then we're going into a color chase. So if we try to do a transition between these two modes, between these two settings, we end up with a CCT chase followed by a color chase. All right, so just to recap, I've got 2 settings saved in the same profile. So I've got the daylight here, 5,600 Kelvin with no plus minus green, and I've got full primary red in the HSI mode. Now, if I go to do a transition between those two, a 5-second transition, let's say we want to go from this and then slowly fade the red in over 5 seconds. This is the result. All right, so now let's compare that to a more sophisticated profile. So this is the profile on the Arri Skypanel to do the same thing. So let's see how a more sophisticated profile handles that, and let's go. All right, so as you can see, there are quite clearly some creative limitations with the current profiles that are in this, but they are working hard at getting it fixed. So my advice is don't overlook this yet if you're looking to replace your Sky panels with this, but I would wait at least until the next firmware update. Now I'm just going to jump in here. The next two issues with the DMX I've spoken to Aputure about, and they assure me that they're going to be fixed in a firmware patch that should be out within the next month. All right, so let's have a look at the last two issues I have with the DMX. One thing I really love to see in this thing is an option for loss of DMX behavior, because at the moment, if you lose DMX, the unit goes to black. So it'd be nice to have a software option in there in the menu where you can select things like retain the last command, because this is one of the things that happens with a few DMX fixtures, and it's really irritating, especially if you're using a portable DMX device like this. You get a flat battery, half the set goes to black in a take. And in a setup like this, where it's live to air, I would never use a light that goes to black on loss of DMX command. Now, the last issue with the DMX, and this is something I found just through my own curiosity. When I was having a look at the unit and having a look at the controller that comes off the back, one of the big features is that the power button is on the controller. So I thought, well, okay, that must be a software-driven on-off switch, okay? So I thought, if I turn the power off, as in if this thing's running off DMX and it's in a lighting grid, if you turn the power off at the end of the day, come back the next morning and turn the power on, do the lights fire up? Interesting question. But this is going somewhere where you're not expecting, okay? So I did a test. Now, we are in daylight. Let's turn the power off and turn the power back on. Indeed, the light fires up, but the DMX has crashed. The settings have changed and it no longer responds to DMX command. All right, so you've got the Nova, you've got the Skypanel. If you own these Skypanel S-30s, is it time to get rid of them and update to the Nova? Well, here's my point of view. This is what I'm going to be doing. And I was keen to sell these, use that money to buy the Novas, and selling two of these and buying two Novas, I'd probably end up with $2,000 in my pocket. That's the how big the resale value on these things is. But I won't be doing that, and here's why. Number one is DMX. Clearly, the two units compared to each other in DMX, this thing is very mature with its DMX, very, very reliable, super smooth. This unit still got its training wheels on, but that could change in the space of one firmware update. Now, the other reason I'm going to be keeping these units is really, really strange and bizarre. These units have a really, really good fire effect, whereas these units, it's okay, but it's not all that believable. Now, that seems like a weird reason to keep the light, but I was thinking about where do I use these all the time? And I use these all the time when we need a fire effect, particularly in shot. Now, in this setup here, the fire that is in shot is actually Arri Skypanel S-30s with smoke machines. The fire effect is that believable. The roll-off on the light engines is that beautiful that you can use these in shot with smoke and it sells as fire. The other time I always use the Skypanel S-30s is when I need a fire effect on something like a period drama. Now, I don't do stuff like that all that often, but when I get it, it's usually 2 to 3 weeks work. And by the way, for all you people looking closely at the photos, that is a 300D Mark II. If I didn't use the fire effect a lot and wireless DMX wasn't such a big part of my workflow, I would definitely be selling these units. And here's why. I own 4 Skypanel S60s. The only reason I bought these 2 Skypanel S30s in the first place was because at the time, these were the most powerful lights that you could run off 2 high-capacity V-locks. Well, since then, battery technology has changed, and you can now run a 300-watt panel off 2 high-capacity V-locks. All right, so what we're getting down to now is it worth swapping them out just for the color render difference? Is there really that much difference? Well, before we get into that, I just want to point something out. When these lights were released, when these light engines came out, most manufacturers were struggling to make a decent bi-colour light with colour render anywhere near as good as this. These were the first RGBW lights on the market. They were the first lights ever made with user firmware updatability. And the reason they don't have any wireless technology in them, you can't run them off a phone app or run them off DMX without plugging something in, is because wireless technology standards for lighting didn't exist back then. That's how old these units are. So this really is the grandparent of RGBW, and it really is amazing that they're still used and in demand today. Now let's start off by having a look at both lights set to 3200 Kelvin. And as you can see by the CCT results, they're both pretty accurate. And the difference between the two here could come down to the fact that it's a handheld spectrometer and only accurate to 3%. The interesting thing is that delta UV is identical. Now the real difference between the two units is in the spectrum analysis. And it might be hard to believe, but the Skypanel had a really full spectrum compared to other LEDs of the day. When we have a look at the TM30 color vector analysis, it really does surprise a lot of people that the Arri scores 93. Everybody has an expectation that the Arri is going to score worse than this. However, the Nova does score a 96. Here are the SSI results, and the Arri scores a pretty respectable 75. But at the moment, the Nova blows every other LED out of the water at 86. Here are the results for 5600 Kelvin. And what I find very interesting is both lights miss the mark by a similar amount. And both lights are also off the white point by a very similar delta UV. Here is the wavelength analysis. TM30 colour vector testing, the Skypanel scores a respectable 91, but is completely blown out of the water by the Nova, which scores a 96. Now here's where the two units really separate. SSI, the Arri scores 64 and the Nova scores 75. Alright, so now let's finish off the review by going through all the technical data. Now we've already covered a fair whack of this, but I'm going to go through it all again because a lot of you come back and just watch the technical data. So I just want to have it all in the same spot. Okay, let's start off with CCT accuracy. So between 2000 and 2500 Kelvin, there is quite a bit of range. The most the unit was out by was 101 Kelvin, and the closest it was to target value was -8 Kelvin. Between 2500 and 3000 Kelvin, it is typically out on average by -16 Kelvin. Between 3000 and 4000 Kelvin, it was typically out by plus or minus 17 Kelvin. Between 4000 and 5000 Kelvin, it was typically accurate to an average of 64 Kelvin. And between 5000 and 6000 Kelvin, it was typically accurate to minus 120 Kelvin on average. Okay, now let's talk about the color render, starting with SSI. Set to 3200 Kelvin, tested against the 3200 Kelvin standard, the unit came in at 86. The Nova set to 5500 Kelvin, tested against the CIE D55 standard, scored 75. Alright, now for the TM30 scores, between 2000 and 2400 there's quite a bit of range, so right down the bottom at 2000 it scored 62, and up at 2400 it scored a very respectable 93. Between 2500 and 3000 Kelvin it scores an impressive 96. Between 3000 and 4000 Kelvin it scores a 95.3 on average. Between 4 and 5000 Kelvin it scores 95.7 on average. And between 5 and 6000 it scores a consistent 96. Okay, let's talk about delta UV, which is the white point accuracy of the light, or how close it tracks the Planckian curve. Between 2000 and 2400 Kelvin, the most it was out was -23 increments, which is the equivalent of the unit being pink by, in old school standards, a 1/8 correction gel. The closest it got to the Planckian curve was 4 increments. Between 2500 and 3000 Kelvin, the unit is accurate to +6 increments. Between 3000 and 4000 Kelvin, it is accurate to +4 increments. And between 4000 and 5000 Kelvin, it is accurate to +10 increments. 5000 to 6000 Kelvin, it is accurate to +12 increments. Now, to put +12 increments into some sort of scale of plus green, that means the light is ever so slightly green by the equivalent of slightly less than a 1/16th correction gel. Now, to put that into perspective, a 1/16th correction gel doesn't exist. All right, time to look at our commonly used kelvins. 3200 Kelvin came in at 3200 Kelvin on the money. TM30 color vector score was 96% color render with 103% saturation. Here is the wavelength analysis. And the white point is surprisingly accurate with a delta UV score of 0.0003, When I dialed in 4,400 Kelvin, I got 4,355 Kelvin with a TN30 color vector score of 95% color render with 103% saturation. Here is the wavelength analysis. And the white point accuracy is extremely healthy with a delta UV score of 0.0008. When I dialed in 5,600 Kelvin, I got 5,491 with a TN30 color vector score of 96% color render with 103% saturation. Here is the wavelength analysis. And the white point accuracy is quite good with a delta UV of 0.0014, which makes it ever so slightly green to the equivalent of 1/16 of a correction gel. Okay, so let's have a look at how this thing dials in a primary color vector. Red, which should be 0 or 360 degrees, came in at 1 degree. Green, which should be 120 degrees, came in at 118 degrees. Blue, which should be 240 degrees, was smack on the money at 240 degrees. Okay, let's have a look at how this thing dials in its secondary color vectors. Yellow, which should be 60, came in at 68. However, it does look green to the eye, and I'd recommend dialing in 44. Cyan, which should be 180, is extremely close at 176. And magenta, which should be 300, came in at 301. Okay, that's another review over, but next week we're coming back to this light to have a look at the DOP choice accessories that are available for it.